In case I don't see ya. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Welcome to Shadow Archive, a channel dedicated to hidden power, buried truths, psychological control, and the darker systems operating beneath ordinary reality. Tonight, we're looking at The Truman Show, not just as a film, but as something far more unsettling. Because beneath its familiar surface lies a story about control, repetition, fear, and a world so carefully designed that its prisoner never thinks to question it. And the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to ignore what this film may really be saying.
Most people remember The Truman Show as hopeful, almost comforting. A story about one man breaking free. But beneath that uplifting surface is something far less reassuring. Because Truman's prison was never hidden by iron bars. It was hidden by routine, familiarity, and a world so seamless he never thought to test it. That is what makes the film linger. The exit existed, the boundary was there, the door was real. Truman lived beside it for years and never looked for it because the greater trap was not physical confinement. It was the conviction that reality, however strange, was complete enough not to question. This is where the story becomes more unsettling than sentimental. The Truman Show is not only about surveillance, media, or entertainment. It is about a manufactured world so stable, so orderly, and so emotionally persuasive that its prisoner begins defending the architecture of his own captivity without realizing he is doing it. The original script frames this through ancient esoteric traditions and Gnostic cosmology. This version keeps that structure but grounds it more carefully. We are not claiming the film secretly proves a religious system. We are asking why its imagery of false order, scripted life, and controlled awakening map so cleanly onto those older frameworks. See, Haven is the first clue. Everything moves with mechanical grace, the same greeting, the same traffic, the same smiling neighbors, the same weather arriving on cue. At first it looks idyllic, but perfection in this film functions as a warning sign. Nothing alive should feel this choreographed, this frictionless, this obedient to invisible timing. In Gnostic thought, the world of matter is not celebrated as ultimate reality. It is often described as a lower order, a structured realm maintained through limitation, repetition, and ignorance. Whether read literally or symbolically, the resonance is obvious. Sea Haven is not chaos pretending to be order. It is order concealing a cage. The town regulates everything because unpredictability creates questions, and questions threaten the script. A falling studio light, a misfired cue, a repeated traffic loop. These small failures matter because they introduce the one thing a constructed reality cannot tolerate for long. Unscripted doubt. Doubt is not just inconvenience, it is structural corrosion. That is why the painted horizon matters so much. It promises distance, freedom, possibility. But when Truman finally reaches it, he does not find transcendence. He finds surface. The sky cracks into scaffolding. Infinity collapses into painted architecture. The film's most important revelation is brutally simple. The world had edges all along. The original script compares this to ancient descriptions of cosmic barriers. Firmaments, guarded heavens, layered enclosures designed to keep consciousness circulating within a closed system. That comparison remains interpretive, but useful. Because what Truman discovers is not merely deception. It is containment disguised as openness, and that distinction changes everything. Sea Haven does not rely on one wall. It relies on nested boundaries. Water trauma keeps Truman from approaching the edge. Routine keeps him from questioning time. Relationships keep him emotionally anchored. Production staff intervene whenever he drifts too close to a crack. It is redundancy, not force alone, that makes the prison durable. And then we arrive at the deeper prison, the script itself. Truman does not simply live inside a set. He performs a role so continuously that the role begins to feel identical to identity. His greeting, his route, his smile, his reflexes, every repeated behavior turns the artificial into the natural and the natural into unquestioned law. That is the film's creepiest implication. If enough routines are installed early enough, the captive begins carrying the system internally. At that point, the prison no longer needs constant enforcement from outside. The subject becomes self-regulating, self-correcting, even self-soothing. Because breaking character starts to feel less like rebellion and more like psychological collapse. The mirror scene captures this perfectly. Truman rehearses his catchphrase to his own reflection with a brightness that is almost convincing, yet not fully human. Something in the repetition feels mechanical. The smile lands a fraction too neatly, and a disturbing question begins to form. Is there a self beneath the performance, or only performance layered over time? The original script answers through the old language of the divine spark, a core of consciousness prior to conditioning, prior even to personality. You do not have to accept that theology literally to feel the force of the idea. The film keeps pressing toward the same problem. What remains of a person after the script is peeled away? As Truman's world starts to thin, his so-called breakdown begins. But from another angle, it does not look like breakdown at all. It looks like recognition. Love begins to feel staged. Friendship feels timed. Ordinary life develops a hollow center. And once those impressions accumulate, his instability starts to resemble awakening more than madness. Every closed world requires a center of authorship, and in Sea Haven that role belongs to Christoph. He watches from above, shapes the weather, manages outcomes, and speaks with the confidence of a creator who believes his construction is not only functional but morally superior to the world beyond it. What makes Christoph unsettling is not simple cruelty. It is conviction. He does not present himself as a tyrant. He presents himself as a guardian. He believes he has given Truman safety, meaning, and protection from a harsher outside world. That logic is what gives his control its eerie plausibility. Domination arrives disguised as care. The original script draws a direct parallel here to the demiurge, the false creator of Gnostic cosmology. A being defined less by open evil than by possessive certainty. Again, that framework remains interpretive, but the pattern is difficult to ignore. Christoph loves Truman in the exact way a warden loves a prisoner he cannot bear to lose. That possessive logic becomes clearest the moment Truman tests the boundary. As long as he remains compliant, Christoph's interventions are soft, almost paternal. But once Truman tries to leave town, the atmosphere changes, roads close, emergencies appear, flights become impossible. The world that claimed to protect him begins behaving like a system terrified of losing him. This shift matters because it exposes the nature of the arrangement. Sea Haven is not simply a fabricated environment. It is a world built on the assumption that one man's freedom can be postponed indefinitely if enough obstacles are presented as reasonable, accidental, or necessary. Consent is replaced by management, and management is made to look humane. The original script reads Christoph's final storm as the point where the creator becomes undeniable as jailer. That interpretation holds. When Truman sails toward the horizon, Christoph does not let the experiment conclude naturally. He escalates to violence. Winds rise beyond the scale of the environment. Waves become lethal. Control reveals its teeth. This is the moment when benevolence stops being persuasive. Christoph has spent decades speaking the language of protection, but a single decision clarifies the truth. He would rather risk Truman's death than permit Truman's unscripted life. Whatever affection he feels is real enough. What makes it dangerous is that it never outranks possession. The Gnostic comparison becomes strongest here. In those traditions, the rulers of the lower world do not merely restrain. They persuade, frighten, and seduce souls back into compliance. Sea Haven operates the same way. It does not start with open brutality. It starts with convenience, emotional anchoring, and carefully managed alternatives to actual freedom. And when persuasion fails, Christoph turns to the oldest argument any controlling structure can make. The unknown beyond the system is worse than the system itself. It is a subtle claim, but extremely effective. If the outside world cannot be disproven as dangerous, then captivity can still be sold as a form of rational caution. Listen closely to what Christoph tells Truman at the end. He does not say only that Sea Haven is safe. He says there is no more truth outside than inside his creation. That phrasing is revealing. It suggests authority but also limitation. Christoph cannot verify what lies beyond the dome. He can only defend his jurisdiction. That is why his power feels so brittle beneath the confidence. He knows everything about Truman's routines, habits, and triggers, but he does not know what Truman will become once the script ends. He can orchestrate the enclosed world perfectly. He cannot follow Truman through the door. That boundary is the true limit of authorship. The original script makes an important point here. Truman does not defeat Christoph through argument. He does something more devastating. He invalidates him. He treats Sea Haven as a completed performance, not an absolute reality. That act of refusal, quiet, almost polite, reveals that Christoph's authority always depended on belief. But Christoph is not alone. No such system ever is. Sea Haven survives through a distributed network of enforcers, technicians, performers, and believers. This is where the script's comparison to the archons becomes useful, not as proof of hidden metaphysics, but as a way of describing bureaucratic control divided across countless hands. The brilliance of the film is that it makes this distributed control mundane. The people maintaining Truman's prison are not monsters in cloaks. They are actors, producers, camera operators, sponsors, editors. Each person handles a fragment of the lie. Each one can plausibly tell themselves they are only responsible for a small part. That fragmentation matters because it protects the system from conscience. When responsibility is divided finely enough, no single participant feels like the architect of harm. Yet the cumulative effect remains total. A human life is scripted, monitored, monetized, and enclosed for decades, while everyone involved gets to experience themselves as merely doing a job. Marlon embodies this dynamic better than anyone. He arrives with a six-pack, easy warmth, and the emotional vocabulary of a lifelong friend. Then he reassures Truman that everything is fine, that nothing is fake, that reality is still intact. What Truman does not know is that the reassurance is being fed to Marlon through an earpiece. What makes the scene disturbing is not just the deception. It is the possibility that Marlon is sincere inside the lie. He may not wake up thinking he is gaslighting his friend. He may genuinely believe he is helping someone through a crisis. That is what gives the system its depth, manipulation delivered with authentic emotional tone. The original script is right to emphasize this point. Conscious evil is easier to resist than unconscious participation. You can defend yourself against someone openly trying to control you. It is much harder when the person across from you appears caring, credible, and convinced that your resistance itself is the problem. Sea Haven extends that logic outward into infrastructure. 5,000 cameras, production staff at monitors, advertisers funding the machinery, audiences around the world consuming Truman's captivity as comfort viewing. The control room is only the visible core. The real engine is collective participation sustained by habit, profit, and emotional investment. This is why the audience inside the film matters more than it first appears. They do not directly imprison Truman, but they normalize the arrangement by watching. Their attachment gives the show momentum. Their demand gives it cover. When the structure is threatened, they are not neutral spectators. They are part of the ecosystem that made it possible. And the ending makes this point with chilling economy. Truman escapes. The viewers celebrate for a moment. Then they ask what else is on. The system loses one captive, but the appetite that sustained the system remains intact. That is one of the film's darkest observations. Liberation can occur without changing the culture that required captivity in the first place. So far, the prison has looked social, architectural, and theatrical. But the film's most effective restraint operates deeper than any set wall. It lives in Truman's body. More specifically, it lives in fear that has been engineered so precisely it no longer feels imposed. It feels personal, natural, and unquestionably his own. The staged drowning of Truman's father is not just a plot device. It is conditioning. The trauma fuses water with grief, departure with loss, curiosity with danger. From that point forward, the ocean does not merely surround Sea Haven physically. It becomes the emotional edge of Truman's world, enforced from inside his nervous system. This is one of the film's sharpest insights. The strongest prisons are not always maintained by guards. They are maintained by autonomic reflexes, panic, avoidance, dread, bodily resistance that triggers before reason can intervene. If the captive's own system revolts at the thought of leaving, external force can remain almost invisible. The original script connects this to ancient descriptions of fear as a mechanism of spiritual containment. Whether or not one accepts those frameworks literally, the psychological reading is solid. Control becomes far more durable when fear is no longer experienced as manipulation. It is simply felt as self-preservation, and self-preservation is difficult to argue with. Notice how carefully the film broadens the trauma. It is not only that water is dangerous, it is that leaving is dangerous. The association spreads across Truman's entire world. Travel becomes threat, distance becomes risk, the outside becomes a zone of death, unpredictability, and irreversible loss. That is how confinement becomes worldview. By the time Truman is an adult, his fear has generalized so completely that the physical boundary barely needs to assert itself. He cannot cross a bridge without panic rising in his body. He does not need chains. He needs only the expectation of catastrophe. That expectation does the rest, faithfully and repeatedly. That is why the storm scene matters so much. It is not merely a climax of action. It is the moment Truman confronts the conditioning beneath the plot. He is no longer just sailing against Christoph's control. He is sailing against the memory architecture that has defined danger for most of his life. And then comes the turn. Bound to the mast, battered by waves, Truman reaches a point beyond negotiation. His line, "You're going to have to kill me," lands with such force because it marks a total inversion of values. Safety is no longer primary. Remaining inside the lie has become worse than the possibility of death. This is the script's strongest transformation beat. Truman does not conquer fear by making it disappear. He conquers it by refusing to organize his choices around it. The fear remains real, the body remains terrified, the danger remains immediate. What changes is the hierarchy. Truth rises above survival, and the system instantly loses leverage. The original script reads this as the moment when false authority reaches its absolute limit. That is persuasive. Any controlling structure can threaten pain, exile, humiliation, even death. But it cannot finally control someone who has decided that authenticity matters more than endurance. At that point, coercion begins collapsing under its own logic. Christoph recognizes this immediately. Once Truman stops bargaining with fear, the storm becomes less useful. Christoph can intensify the violence, but he cannot restore the old obedience. The equation has changed too far. And that is why the storm ends. Not because mercy suddenly appeared, but because the creator's options have narrowed to mutual destruction. From here, the film shifts into another register, awakening through anomaly. Truman does not become conscious all at once. He is not handed a revelation. He is exposed instead to glitches, small tears in the fabric of the world that are easy to dismiss individually and impossible to ignore once they begin forming a pattern. A studio light falls from the sky. A radio begins narrating his movements in real time. A dead father reappears briefly on the street. Cars repeat their routes with suspicious precision. His wife starts speaking like an advertisement instead of a person. None of these incidents proves everything. Together, they destabilize everything. This is how constructed realities often fail. Not through one decisive contradiction, but through accumulation. One anomaly can be explained away. Two can be filed as coincidence. But eventually, the effort required to preserve the official story becomes greater than the effort required to question it. That is when doubt stops being a mood and becomes method. The original script makes an important distinction here. Awakening does not begin with authority handing down truth. It begins with direct perception. Truman starts trusting what he sees more than what he is told. That shift sounds simple, but psychologically it is catastrophic. It requires revising the very framework through which all other experience has been interpreted, and that revision comes at a cost. Once Truman starts testing patterns rather than receiving them passively, he becomes erratic in the eyes of everyone around him. He looks paranoid, unstable, difficult. From inside the consensus reality, his awakening resembles pathology, because any system built on agreement will treat fundamental doubt as a threat. This is one of the film's most disturbing social observations. Sanity is often defined not only by perception, but by compatibility with the dominant script. The person who insists that something foundational is wrong, while everyone else performs normality, risks losing credibility before they ever gain proof. That pressure alone sends many people back to sleep, but Truman does not go back. Once he sees enough of the pattern, innocence cannot be restored. The world has become reactive in his eyes. It adjusts to him. It blocks him. It answers him too neatly. And from that point forward, the central question of the film is no longer whether Sea Haven is fake. It is whether Truman will keep moving once he knows. One of the most painful moments in the film arrives quietly. Truman's wife looks at him with perfect sincerity and says he is having a breakdown. She offers help, comfort, intervention. On paper, it sounds compassionate. In context, it is devastating because the system now uses care itself as a method of correction. Truman's reply is the line that changes everything. Who would I talk to? It is not dramatic, but it is final. In that moment, he understands that every available authority inside his world has already been absorbed into the script. There is no neutral witness left within the structure. The original script is strongest here because it identifies the loneliness of awakening without overstating it. Once Truman realizes the entire social field is compromised, validation becomes impossible. He cannot rely on consensus because consensus is part of the machinery. He is left with only perception, memory, and the willingness to trust both under pressure. That is a brutal threshold to cross. Most people do not fear truth in the abstract. They fear isolation. They fear the social cost of seeing something other people refuse to name. They fear becoming the difficult one, the unstable one, the one whose perception threatens the comfort of everyone else. The film understands that cost intimately, and once Truman crosses that threshold, Christoph's methods begin to harden. Subtle redirection gives way to active obstruction. The system no longer behaves like a world. It behaves like a defensive organism. Travel agencies fail, buses stall, roads close, emergencies bloom exactly where Truman is heading. Control becomes visible because panic has entered the architecture. This escalation is one of the clearest signs that Truman has become dangerous in a very specific way. He is no longer merely unhappy within the script. He is attempting to leave it. Systems can often tolerate discontent. They can even monetize it. What they cannot tolerate is a person who starts treating the perimeter as negotiable. That is why each failed departure matters. Every blocked route teaches Truman something new. The obstacles are coordinated, the timing is too exact, and the world responds to his intentions rather than simply to his movements. This is the point where his suspicion matures into evidence. Not absolute evidence, but enough to make retreat psychologically impossible. The original script compares this to hostile thresholds in esoteric literature, where each ascent is met by a stronger form of resistance. That framing remains interpretive, but it clarifies the pattern. The closer Truman gets to the boundary, the less persuasive the illusion becomes and the more naked the machinery reveals itself to be. Watch the sequence carefully, and a grim logic emerges. First, social incentives are offered. Career, domestic stability, reassurance, the promise of a normal future. Then come logistical barriers, traffic, roadblocks, environmental accidents. Then emotional pressure, tears, intimacy, appeals from people he trusts. The layers are deliberate, each one is a different language of containment. And when all of that fails, the system reaches for force. This matters because it shows what lay underneath the softness all along. Sea Haven was never maintained by kindness. It was maintained by calibrated leverage. Kindness was simply the least expensive method until Truman's consciousness made more expensive methods necessary. That is a very different kind of horror. The storm, then, is not merely spectacle. It is revelation. Christof is willing to risk Truman's death to preserve the world he built around him. That choice strips away every paternal justification offered earlier. Protection is exposed as possession. Safety is exposed as enclosure. Love is exposed as something that cannot survive the other person's freedom. This is also where the film stops feeling whimsical altogether. Whatever comic or satirical energy it once carried has burned off. We are left with a man tied to a mast, facing manufactured death because he chose unscripted life. The moment is absurd only from a distance. Up close, it is cold, intimate, and structurally merciless. The original script gives this moment spiritual weight. But even without that language, its emotional truth is clear. A controlling system loses its most reliable weapon when the person inside it stops treating fear as the final authority. Once Truman is willing to lose everything, fear can still hurt him, but it can no longer guide him. That is why the film's final act feels less like escape and more like renunciation. Truman is not simply trying to get out. He is letting an entire manufactured self fall apart in the process. His routines, attachments, assumptions, and even his most intimate memories have all been shaped inside the lie. To leave means surrendering them without guarantees. This is the quiet brutality of the door at the end. It is not framed as triumph in the conventional sense. It is framed as a choice made under conditions of radical uncertainty. Truman does not know what is beyond it. He has no proof that reality outside will be kinder, truer, or even emotionally survivable. What he does have is a negative certainty. Staying is no longer possible. That distinction is crucial. Some forms of liberation do not begin because the future becomes clear. They begin because the present becomes intolerable. Truman does not step forward because he understands the next world. He steps forward because he has finally understood this one. Christof's final speech tries to reverse that recognition. He offers identity, continuity, and narrative coherence. He reminds Truman that he has been seen, watched, protected, known. It is a brilliantly manipulative appeal because it reframes captivity as intimacy. The argument is not stay because you are trapped. It is stay because you are loved. But the film has already taught us how dangerous that argument can be. Surveillance is not the same as understanding. Constant observation is not the same as care. Christof may know Truman's habits better than Truman knows them himself. But that knowledge was extracted inside total control. It proves authorship, not moral legitimacy. Christoph's uncertainty leaks through his confidence in one crucial phrase. There's no more truth out there. Not no truth. Not nothing. Just no more. It is a subtle admission that he cannot speak with authority beyond the dome. His jurisdiction ends at the boundary, and he knows it. That uncertainty destabilizes everything. The original script is right to linger here. Christoph has governed every visible condition of Truman's life, but he has never governed reality itself. He has governed a model, a simulation, a managed enclosure. The moment Truman places his hand on the wall of the world, authorship and reality split apart in a way they cannot be fused again. That split is why the door matters more than the wall. The wall confirms deception. The door confirms possibility. A prison can still be psychologically total, even when escape is technically available. In fact, the film's most disturbing idea may be that the exit was present all along, but the system never needed to hide it physically. It only needed Truman not to imagine that the sky could be touched, that the horizon could be tested, that the painted infinite might have a seam. This is a far more sophisticated form of control than a locked cell. It is a world organized so effectively that the captive never develops the reflex of verification. The original script frames this as a central esoteric lesson. The boundary remains effective only while it is mistaken for totality. That is a useful way to read the film. Whether the barrier is metaphysical, institutional, social, or psychological, its deepest power lies in appearing final before anyone has confirmed that it actually is. And then Truman does something deceptively simple. He pauses, turns, smiles, and repeats the line that has functioned as his signature for years. Good morning, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This time, the phrase no longer sounds like performance. It sounds like resignation and release. It is also a farewell to the role itself. Truman is not just leaving Sea Haven. He is leaving the version of himself that Sea Haven required. The bow that follows makes this unmistakable. He acknowledges the stage as stage, the life as performance, the persona as something worn long enough to become almost indistinguishable from skin. Then he opens the door, and the film refuses the one thing most audiences are trained to expect: confirmation. We do not see the real world. We do not get reassurance that freedom is joyful, or that truth is rewarding, or that the unknown will justify the cost. The cut to black protects the uncertainty. That refusal is one of the film's greatest strengths. A weaker version would have shown us resolution, sunlight, applause, reunion, some final proof that escape was worth it. But the Truman Show understands that the real drama is not what freedom looks like after the threshold. It is whether the threshold will be crossed at all. The original script connects this to older initiation structures. Journeys through gates, spheres, or trials where the decisive act is not arrival but departure from the controlled world. That comparison stays interpretive, but it captures something true about the film's emotional design. The choice itself is the climax. The destination remains necessarily unknown. This is why the ending continues to provoke such unusual anxiety. It denies us the comfort of outcome and leaves us instead with a more demanding question. If the structure around your life revealed itself as performance, would you walk out without guarantees? Or would you remain inside because uncertainty is harder to tolerate than managed captivity? That question is what keeps the film alive decades later. People return to it because Sea Haven no longer feels like fantasy. Not literally, not in the crude sense that everyone believes they are secretly being televised, but in the subtler sense that modern life often feels scripted, observed, optimized, and shaped by forces rarely made fully visible. The original script is persuasive when it shifts from theology to structure here. You do not need to accept ancient cosmology as literal truth to recognize the pattern. A manufactured consensus, invisible management, normalized surveillance, and a life arranged so smoothly that questioning it starts to feel socially and psychologically expensive rather than liberating. That may be why the film resonates even more strongly now than it did in 1998. The idea of being watched no longer feels outlandish. The idea of identity shaped by systems of repetition, performance, and algorithmic feedback no longer feels distant. Sea Haven remains stylized, but its logic has become far easier to recognize. And still, the film's most unsettling insight is not that control exists. It is that control becomes most effective when it feels loving, normal, and efficient. When the bars look like horizon, when the script feels like personality, when the audience calls captivity wholesome entertainment, when even the captive participates in maintaining the world that diminishes him. This is where the original script's language about the most dangerous prison lands with force. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is precise. The most dangerous prison is the one that works quietly, the one never named as prison. The one whose routines become so intimate that leaving feels less like escape and more like self-erasure. Truman nearly turns back more than once. That matters. The film does not portray liberation as easy or automatic. It shows how often fear, comfort, confusion, and emotional loyalty nearly win. This makes the ending more credible, not less. People do not usually escape total systems in one burst of clarity. They hesitate. They bargain, they falter, and that hesitation is where the film becomes more than allegory. It starts to feel diagnostic. It understands that most people can detect small cracks in their world and still remain inside it for years because acknowledging the crack is one thing. Reorganizing a life around what the crack implies is something far more costly. The film captures this through repetition more than exposition. The same greetings, the same routes, the same sponsored products, the same emotional cues. Over time, repetition stops registering as control and starts registering as reality. That is why Truman's awakening begins not with doctrine, but with noticing loops he was previously trained to ignore. Once he sees those loops, they cannot fully disappear again. He may doubt himself, rationalize individual incidents, even momentarily retreat into habit. But the system has lost its invisibility, and invisibility was its greatest defense. A prison revealed as designed is already weaker than one still mistaken for nature or love. The original script extends this point into a larger question about modern existence, and that move is worth preserving. Whether the pressures are social, institutional, technological, or psychological, many people recognize the same quiet unease. Lives shaped by scripts they did not consciously write but nevertheless continue performing every day. That recognition does not automatically lead to liberation. In fact, the film suggests the opposite. Recognition is only the first disturbance. After that comes the harder phase. Testing the boundary, enduring the backlash, surviving the loneliness, and deciding whether the unknown is worth more than the coherence of the familiar. Most people never reach that point. This is where The Truman Show becomes genuinely chilling. It does not flatter the viewer. It does not assume we would all do what Truman did. It leaves open a harsher possibility. Many people, perhaps most, might reach the wall, understand what it means, and still choose to remain inside because the cost of leaving feels too high. The original script states this directly, and it is one of its best lines of thought. The door can exist for decades and remain unused if the world has been arranged to make the very act of testing it feel absurd, dangerous, selfish, or insane. Control does not always require erasing exits. Sometimes it only requires discrediting the instinct to seek them. This is why Christoph's final offer is so psychologically sophisticated. He is not merely defending his creation. He is offering Truman a return to interpretive ease. Stay here, and the world makes sense again. Leave, and every certainty collapses. Beneath the grandeur of the speech is a simple bargain. Accept coherence even if it is false. That bargain is not unique to Sea Haven. It appears in many systems of control, large and small. People are often invited to trade autonomy for structure, uncertainty for belonging, direct perception for the comfort of approved interpretation. The exchange can feel merciful. The long-term cost is that life stops belonging fully to the person living it. The original script's esoteric language points toward a general truth here. Liberation is not only escape from external limits. It is escape from false meanings installed so deeply that they begin speaking in your own voice. That idea is unsettling because it suggests the final custodian of the prison may be the part of you trained to fear freedom itself. Truman's real breakthrough, then, is not just finding the wall. It is surviving the collapse of authorized meaning. By the time he reaches the door, he has already lost wife, friend, home, career, routine, and narrative identity. The threshold matters because he arrives there after nearly everything the system gave him has already been stripped of legitimacy. That is why the ending feels spiritually severe, even for viewers who reject the metaphysical reading. Truman is not rewarded before he acts. He is not reassured before he chooses. He steps toward uncertainty with no cinematic promise of comfort waiting on the other side. The film respects him enough to let the act stand without emotional bribery. The original script argues that this is what older liberation narratives understood. The unknown cannot be made safe in advance without ceasing to be the unknown. That claim works here. The point of the door is not that it opens onto guaranteed happiness. The point is that it opens onto reality not authored by the prison. Seen this way, the film's final black screen is not withholding in a frustrating sense. It is disciplined. To show us the world beyond too clearly would soften the moral risk of Truman's choice. The uncertainty has to remain intact, because uncertainty is the substance of the choice. Remove that, and the act becomes adventure instead of liberation. This is also why the film continues to invite philosophical, religious, and psychological readings without being exhausted by any of them. It does not belong fully to one framework. Instead, it behaves like a durable symbolic structure, clear enough to feel specific, open enough to absorb new conditions, and disturbing enough to remain unfinished in the viewer. The original script closes by turning the question back on the audience. And that is exactly right. Not as a slogan, but as an ethical challenge. If your routines began to look scripted, your fears engineered, your comforts conditional, and your horizon painted, at what point would you start testing the world instead of explaining it away? That question is harder than it sounds because most prisons do not announce themselves dramatically. They arrive as convenience, loyalty, safety, consensus, love, responsibility, and habit. They ask very little at first, only that you stop checking whether the boundaries are real. Once that habit of checking disappears, the rest can be managed almost automatically. So the enduring force of the Truman Show lies not only in its premise, but in its diagnosis. It understands that captivity becomes most stable when it is distributed across environment, body, relationship, and meaning at once. Remove one layer, and the others hold. Only when all of them begin failing together does freedom become imaginable. And perhaps that is why the film still unsettles people long after the credits. Because it leaves us with no final assurance, only a frame, a false sky, a hidden door, a voice from above offering safety, and one man deciding that an unscripted unknown is worth more than a perfect lie. The rest, unavoidably, is our own answer. If the film has a final warning, it is this. The most effective systems of control do not always look cruel. They look polished, affectionate, reasonable, and complete. They offer identity before you have to build one, explanations before you have to question one, and routines before you have to decide who you are without them. That is what makes The Truman Show more than satire and more than fable. It is a study of how false worlds become believable not through spectacle alone, but through repetition, emotional anchoring, and the strategic management of doubt. The prison works because it has been personalized so thoroughly that escape starts to resemble betrayal. The original script was right to place so much emphasis on the handle of the door. Not the wall, not the storm, not even Christoph's voice, the handle. Because at the end of every constructed reality comes the same test. Will you actually touch the boundary? Or will you keep treating it as untouchable because that is what you were trained to do? Truman touches it. He opens it. And the film leaves us in the darkness after that choice, not to frustrate us, but to implicate us. The cut to black is where interpretation stops being theoretical. The moment the screen empties, the audience is left with the one thing the film has been building toward from the beginning. Responsibility. Responsibility to notice loops. Responsibility to question narratives that arrive pre-assembled. Responsibility to examine whether fear is protecting you or managing you. Responsibility to ask whether the life you are performing still belongs to you. The film does not command an answer. It does something harder. It removes the excuse of never having asked. So the creepiest truth behind The Truman Show is not simply that one man lived inside a lie. It is that the lie felt warm, coherent, and loving enough to pass for life itself. And once a system can do that, once it can make captivity feel natural, its greatest weapon is no longer force, it is familiarity. That is why the film endures. Not because it tells us what waits beyond the door, but because it asks whether we would ever turn the handle ourselves. Truman did. He chose the unscripted over the explained, the unknown over the managed, the real over the rehearsed. The question the film leaves behind is whether we would do the same.
Harder it becomes to ignore what this film may really be saying. So in the end, The Truman Show is not just about one man escaping a lie. It is about routine becoming reality, comfort becoming control, and the terrifying possibility that the most effective prison is the one that feels normal enough to accept. It reminds us that freedom does not begin when certainty appears. It begins when we decide that the lie is no longer livable. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Shadow Archive. And let me know in the comments, if you found the door, would you have the courage to open it?